Hello and welcome to the Leading with Lean podcast. My name's Philip Holt, author of Leading with Lean, The Simplicity of Lean, and Leading Lean by Living Lean. And in this podcast, I narrate all three of my books, chapter by chapter, in which I share with you my over 30 years of experience as a lean leader across many companies globally. Leading with Lean, chapter 18, Making the New Way of Working, the Culture. Being the culture that you want. Earlier in the book, chapter 11, I presented the beliefs of the mosquito leader, and one of them, I am the culture of my organisation, not the victim of it, and I will never blame it for my failure to deliver or let it prevent me from doing what must be done, is directly related to the theme of this chapter. The lean leader knows that they must model the behaviours that the organisation has decided it wants in the future, and the only way to do that is to truly live them. Let's face it, anything other than genuinely living and breathing the behaviours will be obvious to the team members. If you think about it, it makes sense that we must live as we want things to become, as to do otherwise is to perpetuate the past. The most succinct way I could think of to illustrate this is to say that the present is a sum of the past, and therefore we must live as we want to be, not as we were. Whilst the discussion about culture and culture change has increased in significance over the past few years, particularly in relation to the impact of culture on organisational performance, it appears that there is a perception that culture should be directly changed or significantly influenced through culture change programmes. This triggered me to take some hindsight, deep reflection time, to consider what this really means in terms of driving or improving the performance of a business. While I have my own views on how the performance culture of an organisation may be positively improved, I first wanted to discuss what I consider an insidious symptom of the dialogue around culture, which is for individuals to blame the organisation's culture on their inability to perform at a high level. I'm sure that if you think about it, you will have heard something similar to the following. You know what the culture is like here. We just don't do things that quickly, don't work that way, they just never do what they should, etc. We seem to have created a sort of culture whereby we assume that we are powerless to oppose the culture of the organisation that we work in and must slavishly behave as it commands. However, what makes up the culture of an organisation? It is surely its people and the sum of their behaviours, the mindsets that those behaviours drive, which in turn creates the culture of the organisation, which in turn influences their behaviours, and so on. This is what I call the culture cycle, and in the book you would see a picture of an upside down triangle with culture at the top, an arrow circling round to behaviour, which then circles round to mindset, which then circles round to culture, showing this unending cycle of behaviour impacting mindset, which impacts culture, which impacts behaviour, and therefore so on. Therefore, if I, as a member of the team, accept the culture as it is and choose to behave as it influences me to do, then I am part of the sustainment of that culture. And if I simply sit passively waiting for a culture change programme to be launched or for senior management to change the culture, then I am simultaneously the victim and the perpetrator of this crime against high performance. It appears to me that if instead we take individual responsibility for doing the right thing, even when we feel that the culture is against us, we can start to move the needle, and as our colleagues see the change, they will be influenced to also make their personal contribution to the change in behaviour. This, of course, requires the employee to be highly engaged, and that is why the lean leader should take the lead as a role model, as they must, by definition, be an engaged employee if they are to lead the lean transformation. I recently read a very interesting book entitled The Narrates. That is not pronounced very well, by the way. That is the Dutch title, and I absolutely murdered the pronunciation of it. But it actually means in English, Twisted Organisations, in which the author, Wouter Hart, has used a similar model to that of Simon Sinek's Why, How and What model. However, in his model, the inner circle is the purpose of the organisation. The middle ring is the real world, the actual environment that we live and work in, and the outer ring is the system world, the policies and procedures of the organisation. In his book, Wouter describes how every organisation has all three elements, and that the difference between an excellent organisation with a culture of high performance and a poorly performing one is the direction of the arrow driving the people's behaviour. If the arrow runs from the inner circle to the outer ring, then the organisation will be working based upon its purpose and meaning, and the resulting performance will be high. If, however, the arrow runs from the outside in, the performance will be hindered by a culture of bureaucracy and poor customer experience. This resonated with my thoughts on this matter and also reinforced my belief that if we as individuals can take personal ownership of work based upon the purpose of our organisation, we can make the difference. I realise that it takes energy to do this, but the reward and sense of liberation can be astounding, and together, through our individual action, we can be the culture that we want. The Lean Leader's mission in making the new way of working a culture is therefore discussed and focused on driving the behavioural change of the organisation, encouraging, reinforcing and requiring that the team members and the leadership consistently repeat the new skills that they have been taught, reminding them of the principles of a lean thinking organisation until these behaviours become a mindset, a way of thinking, and ultimately a significant part of the culture of the organisation. This behavioural intervention point is critical and very practically based and contrasts with a more common approach of mindset training. In that approach, the mindsets designed by the organisation are taught to the team members, possibly with the behaviours discussed and described, but without practical reinforcement on an ongoing and consistent basis. The usual result of this approach is people well versed in the terminology of the principles, mindsets and behaviours required, but without well-practiced application of them. This will not result in the culture change required by the organisation, although it will create a cottage industry of culture change professionals. The Lean Leader must therefore ensure that the culture change programme is not something separate from the Lean Transformation programme, but is integrated into the Lean deployment model. Although basing it on good theory and involving culture change specialists and HR professionals is beneficial, it must be practically based and simply the outcome of making the deployment of lean thinking into the organisation a success. The problem with problems. Problems are everywhere in life, and in any organisation, the day consists of continuously solving problems. If we want to put a positive spin on it, we can rephrase it and say instead that we have myriad opportunities. However, despite being someone of a generally optimistic demeanour, I prefer to think in terms of problems, as I find that better solutions are delivered when we first focus on what the problem is that needs to be solved. The problem with problems is that they take time to solve, meaning that every problem that a team or team member spends their time on costs money and detracts from them spending time on other problems. If we look at problems from this perspective, an organisation must therefore do three things excellently if it is to maximise its effectiveness and become world class. Firstly, prioritise problems at every level of the organisation. Secondly, problem solve quickly and effectively. And thirdly, put in place sustainable solutions. World-class companies do all three really well, and by doing so, they free up their people's time to focus on achieving more and therefore taking the opportunities that the problems are presented for them. Effective problem solving must therefore become part of the way of working and the culture of the organisation. At the top level of the business, there is the problem of delivering the strategy and achieving the organisation's vision and mission. For example, the core theme of the strategy might be to deliver a certain increase in market share, sales revenue, or EBITDA. To achieve the strategy, the organisation needs to determine with facts what the problems are that are currently causing the gap between the current state and the desired state. In this example, it could be that the product or service offering is insufficient to meet their customers' needs due to technological, quality, price, or delivery gaps. Or it could be that they have insufficient geographical coverage for their customers or potential customers. Perhaps the market is too fragmented, their competitors are stronger than they are in one manner or another, or that there are particular barriers to entry of one form or another. There may also be competency gaps that need to be addressed, or they may be operationally inadequate and therefore unable to achieve the necessary cost of goods sold or service delivery performance. The organisation therefore needs to take the time to truly understand, from the perspective of customer value, what its priority problems are and their root causes, in order that it may focus its scarce resources on only those solutions that will create the breakthroughs that will deliver the strategic objectives. The methodology used by the best organisations was covered in Chapter 6, that of Hoshin-Kanri, also known as policy or strategy deployment. And it's an effective approach to problem solving the strategic objectives of an organisation in a highly effective manner. What the approach delivers, when utilised well, is an organisation aligned and focused on delivering those priorities. This approach, when executed well, avoids the overloading of initiatives and frequent changes in priorities that are common in the majority of organisations. However, it's not only at the top of the organisation that the prioritisation of problems is essential. At every level of the company, problems will be encountered on a daily, if not hourly basis, and we cannot solve them all immediately. Therefore, to drive performance and operational excellence, we will need to solve those ones that cumulatively give us the most impact for our resource spend, and this requires prioritisation. Doing this is not easy, but there are a few tips to help, and if followed, the organisation's team members can learn to apply rapid prioritisation and problem solving. Firstly, ensure that daily management is in place, preferably with leading performance indicators and regular team dialogues at a pace most appropriate for the tact of the team. This may be hourly, daily or weekly, but must be frequent enough to head off problems rather than react to service failure. Secondly, when the team finds a problem, it must be immediately registered as a concern and an owner determined. Ideally, it will be captured on the 3C, that's a concern, cause and countermeasure board of the communications cell, and to ensure that the PDCA cycle is followed. And as Teiichi Ono said, no problem found today should take longer than tomorrow to resolve. The third thing is, on a shop floor, either in a physical, that's a manufacturing line, or a virtual, say a service centre setting, escalating problems will most likely be via an hand-on call by the operative to their direct supervisor at a very short interval, whilst in other environments it could be at the next communication cell meeting, project review, or via a phone call. Again, how you do the escalation will be very much determined by the process, its tact time, and the people involved. But you need to determine what is an appropriate short interval to determine and execute upon, or trigger, I should say, the initiative of an hand-on call. Don't hide problems, call up problems, make them visible. The fourth element is, whichever the method, it must be an interval sufficiently short for the tact of the process, with the guiding principle being that it must be short enough to provide the opportunity to solve the problem before any significant delay or customer impact is created. Next, the owner's first task is to confirm the concern as a problem statement and determine if it is serious enough to require attention. The time to do this will depend upon the size of the problem, but in any case, the owner should follow a similar process to determine what we call the 5 W's and 1 H problem statement. With the H, how much of a problem is it, allowing a decision on whether resources should be spent. 6. One common mistake made at this point is to only focus on those problems that are large, that is to say have the biggest potential improvement impact, but naturally take the most effort. This is a common mistake in organisations where only experts solve problems, and normally results in a lot of smaller but cumulatively more impactful problems being left to fester. Because finally, in an operationally excellent organisation, everyone solves problems, and therefore prioritisation is made along the opportunity corridor, with a few large problems being solved via projects, quite a number becoming multi-day cross-functional Kaizen events, and a great many problems being solved on a daily basis by the team members through Kaizen, sometimes referred to as quick and easy Kaizen. And what you'll see in the book is a 2x2 matrix which shows on the bottom the relatively difficulty of actually achieving it, and on the y-axis the relative impact. And what we actually see is that there is a corridor of success where low difficulty but low impact can be solved very quickly by the people who do the work using Kaizen, very quick, rapid problem solving. In the middle area, kind of medium difficulty, medium impact, we can run Kaizen events. And that's where we'll have certain experts who lead teams to solve problems. And then finally, the really large problems, the ones that are difficult to solve but have high impact, we'll have a true expert in, say, Six Sigma, Lean, technology, whatever the required expertise is, who will run a project, probably with a number of team members that will take multiple weeks, even months, and the outcome will be significant. Now, what most companies are doing is concentrating that top right hand side and neglecting the bottom left hand side. But the cumulative impact of engaging everyone every day in solving problems, that Kaizen culture, is what really drives excellence. Hi, Philip here. Sorry to interrupt the narration of this particular chapter, but I just wanted to remind you that all of my personal profits from the books go to charity. And so if you would like to buy a book, it would really be helpful. Otherwise, if you feel that the podcast is sufficient, then please feel free to make a donation to my current charity, which is Women's Aid. It's a great charity which helps to stop domestic violence for women and children. Thank you. Final 2 points to make are that inevitably it means that most of the problems at the bottom left-hand corner are tackled as they are quick and easy to solve, and therefore the team members themselves will undertake problem solving. Again, that Kaizen culture I just referred to. And finally, one very important caveat to the prioritization process is that safety-related problems should always jump straight to the top of the list, and quality-related issues should be deferential only to safety. A safety-first, quality-always approach is a prerequisite of excellence, and so must be endemic in our problem-solving mindset. Once the choice has been made of which problems to solve, rigour and discipline are required to solve the problems quickly and effectively. But the fact that the time has been taken to prioritise will mean that the assigned team members will have more time to focus on those chosen through, instead of being overwhelmed by the hopeful many. So it's do a few really well instead of failing to achieve many. Leadership support for the rapid solution of the problems is essential, with the term rapid being relative to the scale of the problem. However, those problems at the bottom left-hand side of the opportunity matrix would be expected to be solved very swiftly, maybe in an hour or so, but certainly within a day or two, whilst those at the top right-hand side might take significantly longer and could take several months to completion. Nevertheless, the important thing is that the process of problem solving is as rapid as possible given the problem, rather than slow due to the excessive burden on the team members and the associated waiting time. This is where the leadership play their role. Another critical element in making problem solving the way of working is that the solutions put in place should be sustainable. Again, sustainable is a relative term, as in some cases the solution might be short-term to alleviate the problem, whilst a longer-term solution is implemented. This, in fact, one of the reasons why it's rare to hear the term solution used in many lean thinking organisations, as they prefer the term countermeasure, which by nature is always temporary, just for varying periods of time. You will therefore find short-term and long-term countermeasures in use, but never permanent ones, as the problem can always be solved better in the longer term. This is the essence of continuous improvement and a Kaizen culture. However, rather than being a matter of semantics, the critical element of a countermeasure is that regardless of its duration in solving or alleviating the problem, it is controlled and planned. What this means is that whether it is addressing a root cause or a symptom, this is known and chosen, and the duration of its control is planned. There is certainly no guesswork involved, although there may be an element of experimentation. This is ultimately what I mean when I talk about a sustainable solution, one that has been based upon true problem solving with a controlled and planned countermeasure put in place to solve the problem in the best way known and possible at that time. Rewarding execution, not ideas. At the most positive, ideas are the fuel of innovation, and an organisation without ideas is one poor of spirit. Nevertheless, ideas are sometimes used for self-aggrandizement rather than innovation, and this can be debilitating to performance as team members are rewarded for their ideas rather than the delivery of results. This is an environment where highly ambitious ideas of what we should, could, or will look like are valued and rewarded above actions that actually deliver more modest results. What you will observe in an organisation that is operating in this way is that there is a surfeit of ideas that are regularly delivered, often in the form of email, but also in very nicely crafted PowerPoint format. However, connected with this are a couple of other symptoms that point toward an organisation of idea mongers rather than innovative problem solvers, namely, no formal review system for assessing the actual success of projects or programmes, and many ideas directed toward what others should do rather than what I or we could do. Referring back to Simon Sinek and his why, how and what codification, whether it be the Wright brothers, Apple, or an operator on a production line, the idea that they have must be based upon the solution of a problem with meaning, even if that meaning is relatively small in the scheme of things. It must be a problem for which the solution will result in increased value for the customer and, above all, the person with the idea must take ownership for the success of its execution. The lean leader must therefore ensure that the organisation focuses on rewarding and recognising those employees who have not only delivered ideas for improvement, but have assured their success by assuming responsibility and implementing them. What sport teaches us about leadership? Like many trainers, teachers and authors, I often use sports metaphors as a way of illustrating a learning point. Sport is something that the vast majority of people enjoy, whatever the form or type that it may be, and all sports share with lean thinking the elements of respect for people, commitment, engagement, standards, the rules of the game, performance metrics and ranking, innovation, continuous improvement, and, for many sports, teamwork. We can therefore learn a lot from the metaphor of sport. Rugby in particular is a sport that I think epitomises how we can make lean thinking part of our way of working. In 2015, the Rugby Union World Cup concluded with a fantastic spectacle of a final between the All Blacks, that's New Zealand, and the Wallabies, Australia, with New Zealand coming out the winners. However, the sport as a whole was the real winner, as this tournament, which happens every 4 years, continued to grow in its demonstration of the values and ethics that drives its participants, administrators and fans. So what can we learn from rugby about leadership, and in particular lean leadership? The most important overarching element is respect for people, with all of the stakeholders, the players, the referees and assistants, sporting staff, spectators, administrators, demonstrating an enormous respect for each other through their behaviour. It is absolutely amazing to see a 260 pound, 120 kilogram player with the adrenaline flowing and only seconds earlier having been embroiled in a maul, being spoken to by the referee and in response simply saying, "Yes sir," and walking away without argument or obscenity. This respect for both the game and the arbiter of its rules shows a discipline that is needed in all walks of life and definitely in our leadership roles. The respect for people flows into many elements of the game, with safety first, another key element of leadership, demonstrating the use of temporary replacement players when head injuries have occurred, preventing a disadvantage from removing a player to provide treatment, combined with solid regulations around concussion, which team medics apply rigorously. The rules of the game are also applied thoroughly to avoid serious injury in what is a very physical and potentially dangerous sport. Rugby honours its traditions very well, and each team brings elements of tradition with it, the most famous of course being the All Blacks and their haka. Nelson Mandela used the Rugby World Cup hosted by South Africa, creating national support for their rugby team, the Springboks, as part of his healing of the nation during the 1995 World Cup, which they won 15-12. This became a legend and eventually a Hollywood blockbuster. Honouring the traditions of an organisation for the greater good is an extremely important part of leadership. I hope that it's becoming clear that rugby can teach us quite a lot about leadership, and there are a number of other examples that we can take from the World Cup. First, go to Gemba. It almost goes without saying and seems very obvious, but the leadership of rugby teams, including the administrators, do not determine how to drive strategy and problem solve sat in an office or behind a computer screen, but by going to Gemba. They understand that they must be at the place where the value is added, the rugby field, while the game is underway to understand what needs to be improved. Secondly, Yokoton learning. The Argentinian team displayed a significant improvement in their performance at that World Cup. One of the drivers of that success was their recent inclusion in the Southern Championship, an annual tournament between Australia, New Zealand and South Africa, in which they now take part. This participation has provided them with the opportunity to continuously improve their game through learning from their competition. Leaders must develop their teams by helping them to learn from best practice and the ideas of others, rather than trying to reinvent the wheel. Thirdly, setting stretching but achievable targets. The Japanese team set themselves the stretching target of winning at least one game during the tournament, something which they hadn't achieved in 24 years. Their head coach, Eddie Jones at the time, did this through a form of policy deployment over the previous couple of years, which included reducing their reliance on players born overseas. The Rugby Union World Cup allows participation in national teams under residency rules. In the end, they won 3 games, including a shock defeat of South Africa. Leaders need to set stretching targets and participate in the achievement of those targets in a way that breaks through barriers and reaches further than originally thought possible. Fourth, learning from failure. As mentioned above, South Africa suffered a shock defeat by Japan in their first group game. However, as all good teams should, led by their head coach, Heineke Meyer, they worked through their learning from this defeat and made it to the semi-finals. Fifthly, focus on changing culture through behavioural intervention. The Australian team, despite being beaten in the final, have made a spectacular transformation from the team that was under the shadow of a precarious culture only a year before. I won't repeat their issues, but their head coach, Michael Cheika, has turned around the team's performance by instilling the discipline of behaviour that was required of a world-class team. Every leader must work with their teams to define their behavioural standards that will determine the culture of the organisation. 6. The team is bigger than the individual. While there are certainly stars in each of the teams, the language used by the players and the coaches and the actions of the players on the field of play make it clear that the players see themselves as subservient to the team as a whole. This form of camaraderie must be nurtured by a leader, as superstar team members do not ultimately deliver the sustainable high performance that we require. Number 7, reward in practice. Carter, the New Zealand's fly half, is a model example of a player whose consummate professionalism in terms of rigorous practice delivers game-winning moments. However, in rugby union, many of the players are amateurs and still demonstrate a high level of commitment to practice. A leader must ensure that this commitment to practice in their particular area of expertise is valued through support and focus, including allowing access to training, coaching, and professional networks. And finally, everyone is a leader. To take Carter once again as an example, during the World Cup final, Australia were making a comeback and looking like they might turn the game around and win. However, Carter took a decision to attempt a drop kick, which was successful and took the wind out of the sails of the Wallabies, giving New Zealand a renewed impetus from which they went on to a convincing win. Enabling the organisation to support leadership by all is critical to creating a high-performance organisation. There are many examples of great leadership, but I believe that the game of rugby union truly epitomises the type of leadership that creates a high-performance organisation and drives operational excellence. If we can take inspiration from this credo of respect, integrity and discipline in our business, I believe that we'll be much better off.